Let's go.
Let's go. Oh,
Do you want to?
sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Let's say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we love spooky stuff, and we also understand the difference between legal results and social and cultural results. I am Lauren Humphreys-Brooks. With me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hello, Karen.
Hello.
How are you doing today? Before we get into all the nitty-gritty stuff.
I'm doing great. It's been a week. I got off a plane and climbed into bed because I was sick all week, and it's been really fun. But it's not COVID.
Yay!
There was a brief moment where I thought it might be, and I was really mad because I'm just outside of my 2 months window, and I'm like getting my booster really soon because of that. I've been waiting for that, and I thought, oh crap, are you kidding me? I got COVID again already. I did not.
Yeah, I got my booster a little early post my infection, partially because mine was very mild and also because I was traveling. So I was like, I'm going to get boosted before I travel and just like, have that level of protection, whatever. But yeah, it was when this was like, I'm going to be so mad if I don't get boosted and then I get COVID again. I'm going to be like, fuck you, COVID.
Yeah, exactly. But, there are other things going around still, so.
Yes, there's still colds and flus and all of those lovely things, and 'tis the season after all for it.
And I mean, I spent 4 days being awake for, 18 to 20 hours at a time. And when you don't sleep and then you're also around, icky people carrying bugs, it makes it much easier to contract stuff.
Film festivals, you're at a film festival, which we're going to talk about,
yeah.
which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. That's why we didn't record last week. But film festivals are notorious for people getting really sick. Like people talk about Sundance all the time, like the combination of high altitude and the time of year and just gross people in close proximity to each other.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
Human beings are disgusting. They
are. Yeah, the only time it's so weird, so strange, but the only time I've gone to Sundance and not come back sick was January 2020 when COVID, like that should have been a super spreader. That should have been when COVID hit America, was that event. And I not only didn't get COVID because we didn't have it really out in the wild here yet, but I also didn't get a flu or anything that year, and I usually do every year. So, like, I remember a couple years ago, there was one time I was walking up these really steep steps. They were like ski steps going up to one of the slopes. I was going to a resort to do an interview, and it's outside. It's freezing cold. I mean, it's like, 18 degrees, which is freezing. And I felt it the moment my lungs were like, nope, you're gonna get sick now. It was so weird. And within 24 hours, I was like dying. So
yeah, your lungs are totally like, nope, fuck you and fuck this. Like,
yep.
Well, you sound like you're doing all right, so we're glad about that. But we're gonna we're gonna talk about some fun things today. But first, I guess we're gonna talk about some not so fun things.
Yeah.
I want to start briefly because I don't think there's tons to say about this, but let's start briefly with the Kevin Spacey result of, as you pointed out before we started recording, of the civil trial. This is not a criminal trial.
Right. The criminal charges are still pending in London.
Yeah, like he's still facing other accusers. So this was the civil trial involving Anthony Rapp, who several years ago came out to talk about Spacey assaulting him essentially when he was a teenager, when he was 14 years old.
Yeah, he was the one that opened the floodgates on Kevin Spacey.
Yeah. And in the result of the civil trial was essentially that Spacey was found, there was found not to be enough evidence to to find Spacey guilty of assault, and I believe he was brought up on battery charges. And a few things that, like, this has been weirdly reported on, and people have been talking about, oh, he's been acquitted, he's, you know, he didn't do it, all of that kind of thing, which of course we get a lot when these kinds of things happen. Few things to note is that there were certain charges that rap could not bring because the statute of limitations had expired. So some of the more serious charges, including things like sexual assault, was just something that he could not bring. And again, this was a civil trial. So that's something to note as we go forward with this. This is a victory for Spacey in a lot of ways, and it certainly like kind of builds up his image again. But we also, I think, as we've talked about a number of times on this podcast, we need to note the difference between legal results and more of the cultural and social ones. There are certain things that have to be proved in a court of law,
Right.
in order for someone to be found guilty on charges, et cetera. Both in civil and criminal trials.
Yeah. Well, and in addition to that, one of the things that I kept seeing yesterday or whatever day it was that the verdict came out, people were saying, and this was partly the fault of the Hollywood Reporter, because that was the article that was mostly going around that was sharing this incorrect information. But they were saying that the jury found that Kevin Spacey did not assault Anthony Rapp. That's not what happened, and that's not what a civil jury does. That's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to weigh the evidence and decide if there's enough that the person being sued, in this case Kevin Spacey is being sued, likely, like if there's enough evidence that they did do the thing that they're being sued for. And in this case, what the jury found was that there's not enough evidence to say yes or no. And so in that case, they have to side with the defendant, not the plaintiff. And so they're not saying, hey, this didn't happen. They're just saying, hey, we don't know if it happened, and because of that, we can't give Anthony Rapp $40 million.
Yeah, and this is something to really pay attention to. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you were saying about the Hollywood Reporter article, there is a lot of, so like we're going to link the CNN article that I think goes into more of the legal issues a little bit more than a number, like the differences between what must be proven in a court of law versus what may have actually happened, or what we think happened, or what someone claims has happened. And as we talked about before, you know, sexual assault generally is difficult to prove, right?
Mhm.
And particularly when you're not talking about, as it were, quote, straightforward rape. You're talking about, you know, touching someone. You're talking about grabbing someone in a way that they don't like, et cetera, et cetera. So proving that, you know, how do you prove that? You don't, especially for a case that has been this long, right?
Yeah.
This is not like, you know, an immediate aftermath of anything. And so we've talked about that before. But the other thing is that a lot of the media reporting on this, especially within film and television media, is people are writing about it who are not legal experts, who aren't court reporters, who do not completely understand the way that that the courts actually work. Like, I don't understand the way that the courts actually work. I understand a little bit more the more that I read. But if I were asked to, you know, write up a news piece about this, I wouldn't necessarily use the correct language. And I think that that's a problem, particularly when we're talking about Me Too within Hollywood, is that we're talking about the overlap between media and the legal world. And there's a lot of misinformation that gets going as a result of that. So we really need to be aware of that, particularly when we're looking at places like the Hollywood Reporter or Variety or some of the bigger kind of trade publications and media publications. They don't necessarily know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So I think that that's something to know. So Spacey still has all kinds of other issues that he is being brought up on. So this is not the end of the road in any sense for him. But we definitely need to note that this does not mean he is not guilty.
Right. And I can almost guarantee that this does mean that he's going to be guilty of giving us another Christmas video.
Christ. And I think that we should end by kind of giving Rapp's words, that what he said on Friday in a statement released on Twitter was that this was about shining a light as part of the larger movement to stand up against all forms of sexual violence. I pledge to keep on advocating for efforts to ensure that we can live and work in a world that is free from sexual violence of any kind. I sincerely hope that survivors continue to tell their stories and fight for accountability. And I think that that's a good kind of place to end on this. So yeah, fuck you, Kevin Spacey.
Yep. Exactly.
Moving to another thing that, again, when we talk about the legal issues wrapped up in Me Too versus the realities of Me Too, let's talk a little bit about Bill Murray. Bill Murray, who has been in all kinds of various trouble recently. This kind of got kicked off again. If we remember, a couple months ago, Murray was actually suspended from a film, from an Aziz Ansari film, Being Mortal, as a result of a complaint by a woman on the film set who said that he straddled her and kissed her. And he claims that he was playing around, that he was making a joke, etc. And she said, you assaulted me. And he did pay $100,000 to settle a complaint from her. So just to note that.
Yeah.
But this sort of got kicked off again because Gina Davis has released a memoir, and one of the things that was brought up was the fact that Murray had actually harassed her when they worked together on the film Quick Change in 1990. And and I'm going to link the article from Pajiba that kind of details all of this. But this resulted in a clip from the David Letterman show being passed around, in which Murray is like feeling her up basically on screen, and everyone's treating this as like, oh, this is a joke, etc. And if you look at Gina Davis, she is not comfortable. This is not like, oh, haha, Bill. This is not something that they've arranged together. She looks uncomfortable. She looks like she's not enjoying herself. This is not funny to her. And he's going farther and farther, touching her shoulders, lowering one of the straps of her dress, etc. And it's really disturbing then to look back at some of the things that have been alleged about Murray, and how he has kind of wrapped himself up in this mythos of like this jester, this guy who, he does these major things as a joke. We talk about him showing up at parties, screenings that he hasn't been invited to, all of this stuff, that he's kind of created this persona of himself as being this, kind of indie darling image that is very idiosyncratic and just pops up in places just like, oh my God, it's Bill Murray. Isn't that funny? I even remember when I was in college at St. Andrews, he was at a celebrity golf tournament there. And there's this whole story about how he showed up at a party and bought everybody drinks. That he was just, so it was this attitude of like, oh, he's just running around. And then you're kind of like, why is this, 50, 60-year-old man at a party for undergrads?
Yeah. Well, there was also like a story. I don't know if this was ever actually true, but there was supposedly a phone number that he had set up where you could call and invite him to your stuff, like weddings and parties and stuff like that. And if he was around, he would show up.
And that seems all very charming and almost like, oh, isn't this cute? Isn't this funny? But there's that others, it has, and I think the Pajiba article makes a very good argument about it, has kind of obscured some of the other things that have been said about him. And he has been accused of violence, of abuse against his ex-wife. He has been accused of abuse on set. He created problems with many, many friends, including people like Harold Ramis, who just like no longer would associate with him because he would be volatile. He would be violent on set. He would scream at people. There's a story that Seth Green tells about him picking Seth Green up, and Seth Green is a child at this point, and putting him in a trash can. And all of this has kind of been laughed off in a certain sense of like, oh, isn't he funny? But now we're kind of looking at it through a different lens, particularly as a result of this more recent allegations that Gina Davis has made, and are beginning to be like, was this funny? Was this really, how much of this is a dodge? How much of this is really like, this is an abusive person?
Yeah. Well, and in that Pajiba article, it even says that Dan Aykroyd had called him the Murray Cane because he was so volatile. It was like, it was like a big storm. You never knew which way he was going and how bad it was going to be, which that is very telling. And, it's interesting because I mean, I've heard stories about Bill Murray for years and years and years, like going back to probably, I mean, I was too young to hear those stories in the 80s, but definitely in the 90s, I would hear stuff about him. And it's interesting because there were also a lot of stories about Chevy Chase, who is basically persona non grata. Like Chevy Chase has been kind of bounced out. He's not going to be part of the community reunion. He's not going to, he's like nowhere to be found these days, practically. Whereas Bill Murray has continued to work, and I think a lot of it is because of this persona that he has cultivated as being this like lovable old grump, which is something that has always been part of his character.
Yeah.
Every character he's played has been this curmudgeon, that, like in Groundhog Day, it's about beating him into submission in a way, but
Mm-hmm.
In Ghostbusters, that's his whole shtick. It's this grumpy guy that you just like. But it's interesting because I think for so long, and this was kind of the same thing with Harvey Weinstein, and I'm not saying Bill Murray is on the level of Harvey Weinstein, not too many people are, but the thing is, like, going back, as much as 25, 30 years ago, I was hearing stories about these guys, about them being just these, like, pretty volatile, terrible people. And because nothing ever happened, I just kind of like pushed it off because, of course, if they were this bad and this abusive, somebody would do something about it, right? Like, I just took that for granted for so long. And now I'm realizing, well, I mean, over the last 5 to 6 years, I've really seen how untrue that really was and how really so much of this is way worse than we ever thought.
Well, and so much of it really does come off as like, even if some of the worst allegations that have been said about him aren't true, right? Or are
Right.
overblown. Just the bullying, the
Yeah.
meanness, right? The willingness to, pick up a child and put him in a trash can. And to have that laughed off. And I think that a lot of it reminds me of the way that just, people beyond someone like Bill Murray, but men of a certain type get away with certain things. They get
Mhm.
away with being bullies, basically, because, oh, they're funny, it's a joke. Oh, he's not serious, he's just being Bill, right?
Yeah.
And you hear that a lot about particularly men, and particularly that kind of abusive men, where you sort of you laugh off, or if you're the victim, you're told to laugh off bad
Mhm.
behavior that crosses a line, right? Because there's a difference between making a stupid joke that doesn't land and physically assaulting someone. There's a difference also between making a stupid joke that doesn't land and then you apologize for it because, hey, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it that way, etc. And just not caring and being like, oh, we're going to run people down, we're going to treat people badly, and it's funny.
Right.
And you see that, I think, at a lot of Murray's persona, because yeah, I think he has definitely wrapped himself up in this myth that he's this, like you say, he's this charming curmudgeon. He's this sarcastic guy. You can't hold him responsible for anything. It's just like, I think that we should. And
Mhm.
this is the problem that runs throughout, particularly comedy, this type of behavior. More so even, I think, in a lot of ways than with dramatic actors, but particularly with comedy, when we're just so willing, because someone is a beloved comedian, to kind of ignore or dismiss or not pay attention to the much more disturbing elements of their persona.
Yeah.
So we will link that entire Pajiba article. It's really good. It breaks down kind of the, like, all of the various things that have been said about Murray over the years, and kind of where we're at with this. And I think that this is one of the things that we often ignore when we talk about Me Too, is that Me Too is not just about legal issues, because as we've discussed, the legality and proving things in a court of law can be very different from the way that we treat people at a social and a cultural level.
Mhm.
You know, Gina Davis is not going to be able to bring Bill Murray up on charges, right?
Right.
Um,
Well, and also, in addition to it not being just about legal issues, Me Too is also not only about sexual assault.
yeah,
It's all kinds of levels of assault and abuse.
it's about curbing this kind of bad behavior and saying that
Yeah.
this is not okay, this is not acceptable. this is not, and also giving audiences, employers, etc., a choice about who are you going to continue to support, who are you going to continue to pay to be in your work, etc. So it's an important issue to actually talk about, and this is part of, the goal is ultimately for us to move past this kind of thing as a society.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily to punish every single person. It's to be like, we're not going to accept this anymore.
Right. That's the thing. It's like, is anything going to happen to Bill Murray as a result of this? Probably not. I mean, he's been winding down how much work he takes on. He is in his 70s now, and I mean, I'm not saying that he should continue to work. Maybe it's time to retire. But there's lots of people too where these stories are coming out now, and it's not about necessarily, and this is why I say it's not just about sexual assault. It's about the bad behavior. And so the more that these stories come out, the more it's like, okay, this is not acceptable. We're not going to let you come onto a movie set and treat people like this. If you want to continue to work, stop being a dick.
Yep. Let's just stop being a dick.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's move on from that. And Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about your Middleburg experience? You were at the Middleburg Film Festival last week, and you saw a lot of interesting films. So do you have anything you want to say about that?
Oh my gosh, so much. Yeah, I had a great time. So, first of all, I did do a write-up after the festival was over of just kind of like, here's what happened and here's what went down. So if you want to read that, you can go to our website. But some things that just to highlight and other things that I didn't necessarily put into the piece. So well, first of all, I was supposed to get there. It was a direct flight from LA. I was supposed to land at 4. Opening night movie is at 7:30. So I had plenty of time because the resort where everything was happening is like 40 minutes from the airport. And I was driving to the airport because I parked my car out there. And as I was driving along, I get an update that my flight was delayed 3.5 hours. And I was just like, oh, for Christ's sake, what the hell? What the hell? And so I was traveling with Jazz Tenke, who's our friend, who works at Variety, and she calls me and she's like, I'm going to try to get on an earlier flight. And I'm like, okay, well, if you find an earlier flight, let me know because I'll try to switch too. And but I'm like, I'm still going to go to the airport because a 3-hour delay is like inconvenient, but not worth, with the traffic around the airport, it's not worth going home and going back out. So I'm almost to the airport and I get another update that, oh no, it's not leaving at 12. It's leaving at 2:30 now. So it was a 6-hour delay, which I would have gone back home for had I known. So anyway, I could not get on an earlier flight. So I missed the opening day, which was bummer. So that happened. And I didn't end up getting into Middleburg until like 10:30, 11 o'clock that night. But so I started off the festival exhausted because I'd been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, right? And now it's like, not only, I mean, now and then it's like, then you travel. So it's like, I was really up at, 1 a.m. East Coast time. I don't know. It was like I just was awake the entire day, 24 hours or something. Anyway, so Friday morning, bright and early. Like it started off so early, and I went to a conversation with Gina Prince Bythewood, and she was there not just to talk about The Woman King, which they were doing a special screening of it that weekend, but also it was just like over her whole body of work, and she is so fun to listen to, and she just has great stories, and just listening to the way her mind works and the way she talks about the process of directing, and also very frustrating to listen to her talk about how she did Love and Basketball and thought, okay, cool, this is open doors for me, and then it still was crickets getting her second movie made. It's like she still was struggling. And then she actually talked a little bit about what happened with Black Cat and Silver Sable, I think that's the one. She was in development on that for a year and a half for Sony and Marvel. and it ended up not going forward. But she was talking about how, like, even though that didn't happen and it was disappointing, just the experience of getting to work in that development process was really really interesting to her, and it gave her a lot of challenges that actually in a way helped prepare her to do films like The Old Guard and The Woman King, which are these big action movies. And so it was just interesting because then she also was just like, I'm tired of people saying that women uh don't want to or can't direct action movies. Look at me. I've just done 2 of them back to back and I love doing them. So yeah, she was great. I really enjoyed her. And they had a luncheon later that day, a women's luncheon. And so I got to actually talk to her at that for a little bit. And she is just so awesome and very, very tall. I felt very tiny next to her. Um, but but yeah, really fun. I also went to a conversation with Ryan Johnson and Bob Ducey, who is his editor. They've worked together on they started on Looper, and then they did The Last Jedi, and then both of the Knives Out movies. And afterwards I got to talk to Ryan Johnson, and I didn't end up doing an interview with him, but we just got to have just a fun little chat. And he is just so personable too. Like, just really, it's so funny because I always like worry about saying people are really nice or whatever, because then stories are going to come out about them. But he was really nice.
Yeah, be careful. Be careful. I recall someone that you were like, oh, he was so charming and he was so nice. And then,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Actually, I got a message a day or two ago from someone who's re-listening to our old episodes
Oh, dear.
and thought it was pretty hilarious how into a certain actor one of our former co-hosts used to be.
Yeah, and we have talked about that, but it's like if you go back and listen to some of those, so those we didn't know,
Yeah,
and he was really
exactly.
convincing and charming and has played
Yeah.
some good parts, etc. So
I
we
will
just
say his
didn't
eyes
know.
were kind of dead a little bit though. But anyway, Ryan
You didn't
Johnson does
know.
not have
You
that
didn't
problem. I
know.
didn't know. I did not know. I really didn't. But Ryan Johnson, if he turns out to be a bad person, I'm going to be shocked because he was so warm and so just like funny and yeah. And his wife was there too. I didn't really talk to her, but apparently she was around and having a good time too. But anyway, yeah, so that was really fun. And he and I got to like have a little chat about Brick. So that was cool because I love that movie. It was his
Oh,
first
yeah.
film. I saw it at Sundance in like 2005 or whatever. So it was just cool. Um and yeah, so then there was the women's luncheon was just like one of the problems that I have in this industry is imposter syndrome. It is real, it is bad. And you go to something like this event, which is very exclusive. None of the men are allowed to come. And not even all the women that are at Middleburg get invited to this either. I honestly don't know why they included me, but I'm so glad that they did. But I'm like sitting at a table with 3 wives of ambassadors and like a lady who works for the US Chamber of Commerce and this other lady who works for the Virginia State Department of Film and TV and stuff. And it's like, oh, over at that table is the Librarian of Congress. And it's just like, how am I here? This is amazing and crazy. And yeah, it was really fun. And there were some other people I got to meet. Jazz and I ran into Stephanie Sue from Everything Everywhere All at Once in the restroom because that's a great place to run into people, is washing your hands at the mirror in the sink. So she was just delightful. And Dolly DeLeon, who is in Triangle of Sadness, she is by far the standout in Triangle of Sadness. And um I got to see her and Gina Prince Bythewood talking, and Gina is like over 6 feet tall, and Dolly is like under 5 feet tall. So it was just such a fun visual. But I was like, oh my gosh, those two need to work together. And I also decided that Dolly DeLeon needs to be in the next Knives Out movie. I know it's not written yet, and I know that Glass Onion hasn't even come out yet, but I don't care. Put Dolly DeLeon in the movie. Anyway. But I also saw movies.
I was going to say, so what movies did you see? Do you have recommendations for things
Oh my
that
gosh.
you definitely watch out for?
Well, so we're talking about the Me Too movement. I bookended my weekend with She Said, which is specifically about Megan Twohey and Jodie Cantor. It's directed by Maria Schrader, who did I'm Your Man last year, which I really liked that movie a lot. Um, and this one stars Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan as Megan and Jodie. And I didn't think it was as polished as I was kind of hoping for, but I think they did a really, really good job of laying out all the work. It wasn't about like making the case against Weinstein. Megan and Jodie were the two that wrote the New York Times article that unleashed the floodgates on the Harvey Weinstein story. And then, of course, Ronan Farrow's article hit a few days later in the New Yorker, I think. Um, but yeah, Tui and Cantor, they're the ones that really got that going. And so this is the story of everything that led up to this article coming out. And so it does a good job of laying out not rehashing the case against Weinstein, but showing the work that went into bringing it forward and how fraught that was, how difficult it was to get these women to be willing to speak up, um and just the emotional toll that it took on them also to hear these stories and for, at certain points not even being sure if they were going to be able to do anything with it. And so it's a good movie. It's really, really well done. I highly encourage people to watch it when it comes out. And then
Right.
so that was the first film I saw, and then the last film I saw was Women Talking, which is Sarah Polley's new movie. And oh my gosh, that was just an incredible, incredible film. It is it's inspired by a true story of these women. This was in about 2010, 2011, something like that, in a Mennonite community down in South America. I think it was Argentina, um, who had been routinely assaulted by the men in the colony for a long time, like years. And eventually the men were caught and arrested, and then the women had to make a decision. So this movie is about these women trying to decide, are we going to stay? Are we going to go? If we stay, what are we staying for? What are we fighting for? And if we go, what's going to happen to us? And so much of it takes place just in a single location in this barn where these women are having this conversation. But it really is such an incredible film. And it's amazing to see how a situation like that in a setting like that can feel so cinematic. People complain sometimes about movies feeling too much like it's a stage play. This didn't feel that way at all. It felt like, no, this is a great film. And the performances are incredible. The writing is just gorgeous. And you really feel the weight of this decision. It really doesn't judge the community. It doesn't judge their lifestyle. It's really about these women and this really difficult decision they have to make. And Ben Wishaw's in the movie too. He's the only man who you ever actually see his face. That's one of the great things about it, is you never see the violence being inflicted. You see the aftermath, but you never actually see women being assaulted, being hurt. Ben Wishaw, he plays like the one guy who didn't get arrested. He's innocent, and he's acting as their recorder. They want minutes of this conversation. And he has a scene that I was like, oh, this jerk. There's so many great performances in this movie, and he's the one that's going to end up getting an Oscar nomination because it's so easy for him to stand out because he's the only man in it, and also his scene is so incredible. So yeah, it's a really good film.
Good.
And I just, oh man, like I just get chills thinking about it. And yeah, it's really, I can't wait for you to see it.
I mean, that's one that I've been looking forward to, yeah, because I've heard some very good things about it. Unfortunately, way too many men have weighed in with their opinions on it. Many of them
Uh-huh.
positive, but I'm sort of like, can you shut up? Can
Yeah,
you
like
not?
let's just yeah, it's
Your
time for women to
opinion,
talk.
yeah, your opinion does not count. It's literally a movie directed by a woman called Women Talking. Your
Hmm.
opinion is not needed here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like my immediate reaction. But in terms of the Weinstein film, I think that it's good, thinking about all of the things that have, happened around Me Too and around Weinstein, et cetera. It's good that there's actually going to be more cinematic records of this,
Yeah.
because this kind of thing does tend to get forgotten, or it tends to get, like, well, this is how it actually happened. This is how, but for years, like even you think about first exposure to things like the Watergate cases
Hmm.
and stuff like that is very often through cinema. And it might not necessarily be 100% accurate, but that's how people kind of remember certain things. And so it's good that there are like films being made that deal directly with this, and that they're good films too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, and a couple of people have been complaining that like, oh, it's just so early. It's only been 5 years or whatever. It's like, okay, when did All the President's Men come out? When did Spotlight come out in connection to the end of the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church? It's like, no, this needs to happen pretty early on, like you say, because we need this on the record. We need this on the cultural record, and our culture record so often is through film. And yeah, it's it's great. So that was the beginning and ending of my festival experience, and I saw some good stuff in between. I saw some not good stuff. We'll just focus on the positive today. I loved Glass Onion. It was so much fun. It's very different from Knives Out. And but that's a good thing. It's a completely different mood, it's a different texture, it's a different tone. Everything about it is just different. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Janelle Monáe is absolutely the standout in that, but there are so many great cameos. Um, Daniel Craig is just perfect as Benoit Blanc, and you actually get to know a little bit more about him, but also the movie isn't all about him, so it's like just little sprinkles, little nuggets about more about him and his life. But yeah, and it's also just a really fun mystery. So I enjoyed that. And then I also on Saturday I really enjoyed The Son, which is by Florian Zeller, who did The Father a couple years ago. This one is Hugh Grant. No, sorry, Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman plays a father whose son is dealing with severe mental illness. And Laura Dern plays his ex-wife, the mother of his son, and then Vanessa Kirby is the young new wife, and they just have a new baby. And it's a really difficult film to watch, but I think it is just it's so good. I think what makes it so good is that it really does do a good job of Hugh Jackman in particular is really good at showing how difficult it can be um to be on the outside of someone's mental health experience, but also be kind of on this journey where you're the person that's supposed to help them and you don't know what to do. And I think he just does it so well. I think it's one of his best performances. And the movie is really it's difficult. It's not a fun movie. It was interesting. It was also very divisive. I think it was probably the most divisive movie I saw. I came out of it going like, man, that was so good. And I hopped into a shuttle to go to another movie, and two people hopped in the shuttle with me and they were like, that is the worst movie of the festival. And I was just like, wow, I thought it was the best movie I've seen so far. And they were like, oh man, you must be having a terrible time here. And I'm like, no. So it was interesting, the different reactions, and I think it's going to continue to be a divisive movie, but I thought it was great. And then I had a 1-2 punch that day of just emotional beatdown, because I went from The Sun to the movie that actually ended up being my favorite of the festival, and that is The Banshees of Inisherin, which is Martin McDonagh's new movie. It stars
Uh-huh.
Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson and Barry Keoghan. And Oh my gosh. I just don't even want to say too much about this movie. I think people just need to experience it. But it's in a nutshell, it's Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell. They're lifelong best friends. They live on a small island off the coast of mainland Ireland. And one day, Brendan Gleeson just doesn't want to be friends anymore. No reason, just doesn't want to be friends anymore. And it, across the channel on the mainland is the Irish Civil War in 1922-23. And so the movie is such an intimate like metaphor for the civil war that's going on and the way that divided Ireland, and that's exactly what's happening here. And it just starts off with this little like, I don't want to be friends anymore, I'm mad at you, and it just escalates and it ends up enveloping this entire community, these two guys. And it's so well done, so well done. Colin Farrell's best performance ever, maybe Brendan Gleeson's too, I don't know, but um just really, really good and very funny, but also just very sad at times too. And absolutely stunning location. Like it's just so green and beautiful. And it's like I want to go to this island. It's so gorgeous. So yeah. So that's kind of that's the best stuff I saw at Middleburg this
Well,
year.
that sounds great. That sounds great. You
Yeah.
saw a lot of really good stuff. I am all of the ones that you were talking about, I'm looking forward to seeing. So except for the sun. The sun, I admit, I'm like, okay, whatever. Like I will probably see it at some point, but the others I'm very, very excited about.
Yeah.
So it sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karen. And
Yeah.
you've got several reviews and a couple of things up on our website about that. And
And more coming. I'm still
okay.
working on getting my reviews out, so
All right, so
yeah.
there will be more on Citizen Dame to citizendamepod.com. Well, let's kind of, talk about our Halloween movie experiences right now.
Yeah.
We did actually get a question that I just spotted on Twitter from Noah asking what is our favorite animated spooky movie?
Oh.
And I think that that's a good one because we want to talk a little bit about, like the films that we tend to rewatch around this time of year. And I admit that I have not actually rewatched this movie in a long time, but I've rewatched parts of it because I love parts of it, and that's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Of course, it is an open question. Is this a Christmas movie or is this a Halloween movie? It's both. It can
It
be
is
both.
both. It's totally both.
I personally am not one of those people that like loves horror movies around Christmas. So I tend to be more towards it's a Halloween movie, partially because the opening number is, probably one of the more iconic Halloween songs as far as I'm concerned. And so even though I haven't rewatched the film itself in quite a while, I love that opening sequence. It really is in terms of Tim Burton's concepts, it's Tim Burton at his finest. And I'm trying to remember we have to remember Tim Burton did not actually direct The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Henry Selick.
There we go, Henry Selick.
Selvig, sorry. I said
and it's such a fun movie. It is so creepy. I remember Oogie Boogie scaring the hell out of me when I was a kid. Just because it was very, very gross. First of all, kidnapping Santa Claus. Second of all, like he's made of maggots and all of that. But he's again another great song that I enjoy listening to many times over. So yeah, I think that that's probably my favorite spooky animated film. I would like to ask like our listeners and people who follow us, etc., give us some more recommendations because I would love some like more adult animation for like scary movies. And I know one of the ones that's been recommended has been Perfect Blue, but I know that that involves sexual assault, and I'm not 100% certain if I want to go in that direction for scariness. But like animation has occupies an interesting place for creating scariness because they kind of have they can do pretty much anything they want to. And I would love to see more sort of spooky animated films. So if there are other recommendations, I want to hear them. What about you, Karen? Do you have a favorite spooky animated movie?
Well, I do really love The Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie, but I think my favorite is probably Coraline.
Oh, that's a good one.
Coraline so much. And it's one of those where it's like, it's that whole your perfect ideal dream world turns out to be a big nightmare. I think it's so great. It's such a good story, and I think the animation in that movie is just so beautiful. So yeah, Coraline.
That's a very good one. I also like I haven't watched it as much, but I really like Paranorman.
I've never actually watched that one.
Oh, that's fun. It's a
That's
fun
what I hear. It
movie.
comes up on so many lists, and every year I'm like, I should probably watch it, and then I don't.
Yeah. It's definite I think it's definitely worth watching. Let's see what else. So what are like some other films that you like just always have to watch during the Halloween season?
Yeah, let's see. Scream. I mean, I can watch that when it's not Halloween too, but I have to watch Scream every year. And Halloween, which I actually just watched again last night. Not the stupid David Gordon Green movies. I'm so frustrated by that one and have a lot of thoughts about Halloween Ends. But
People are
the
so mad
OG
about those movies.
I am so mad.
I just find it really funny because like there's even a petition, just like we were petitioning for them
Wow.
to remake the last foes, just like and I've seen some people who actually really liked it, and I admit that I liked the first of the news trilogy. I haven't seen the other two, I might not, whatever, but I do find it funny how mad people are about those movies.
Yeah, okay, it's true. I will say I will not sign that stupid petition because, like, come on, let's just have better things to do with our time than sign meaningless petitions that are not going to go anywhere. But it's actually kind of funny that I didn't like Halloween Ends so much because it does something that I was mad about the first of his trilogy not doing, which is like one of the things that I hated about his Halloween was what he did with Laurie and how she's this like prepper and isolated from society instead of, going out and making something of her life, even with this like always feeling there was this threat. And now Halloween Ends, she's kind of moved on with her life. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's what should have happened, but it doesn't make sense that she couldn't do that for 40 years. And then after the events of Halloween Kills, suddenly as a 65-year-old woman, she's able to do this? I don't think so. Anyway, it's also the least about Michael Myers, which isn't necessarily the problem. And I think it did have some interesting things to say there, but I just didn't think it did a good job of it. But anyway, the OG Halloween is a must-see. Cannot complete the Halloween season, spooky movie season, without watching Halloween. Yeah, so those are my two big ones, Scream and Halloween. How about you?
I mean, yeah, Halloween is definitely a classic. So two of the big ones that I always seem to rewatch this time of year are first of all, Young Frankenstein, which is, as if you have not seen Young Frankenstein, it is on HBO Max. I do not know how you managed to get to this point in the world and not see Young Frankenstein.
I mean, we all have our movie blind spots. I definitely have filled a few of those recently, but Young Frankenstein should not be one of them.
It's so classic, and like honestly, I have, I saw Young Frankenstein when I was quite young. My parents rightly thought like, oh, she'll enjoy this. And of course I didn't get all of the jokes, but I really enjoyed it. I love that film. It's one of those things that like I quote all the time. Like it will come up every time I make Ovaltine. I cannot not do an impression of Frau Blucher. Just like Ovaltine. I can't. You put the candle back. All of that stuff is just, but I think that it's a testament to the film that it holds up as well as it does. Because I've seen it, I cannot even fathom how many times I've seen this movie. And every single time I'm like, I know the jokes are coming, I know what the gag is going to be, and I still laugh at it. Like it's still funny. And part of it is because the cast is just fantastic. I mean, Mel Brooks assembled a really remarkable cast for that period. My only criticism is that Madeline Kahn isn't in the movie enough, and there should always be more Madeline Kahn in any film.
That is correct.
But when she's there, she's just like luminous. She just raises the bar even more, and which is remarkable when you look at the rest of the cast of people like Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman. and Terry Garr and Peter Boyle and Cloris Leachman, etc. They're just so funny. And it is one of those films that has, in some ways damaged the other Frankenstein movies for me, particularly Son of Frankenstein, which if you've never seen, I do recommend you watch it. It's a great, like a really enjoyable film. But Brooks takes a lot of things from Son of Frankenstein and uses them in Young Frankenstein. And it's next to impossible now for me to watch Son of Frankenstein without just thinking of that. Like the whole Inspector Kemp with the wooden arm comes directly from Son of Frankenstein. There's a character in that play, and I can't remember who plays the character right now. But it's the same thing. He's like got this ridiculous German accent. He's got this wooden arm that he keeps on, moving up and down, etc. And it's just so fucking funny. Even in Son of Frankenstein, and then you watch Young Frankenstein, it's like I can't take this seriously. So yeah, Young Frankenstein is one of the major ones for me. And actually, my parents and I'm at home right now, and my parents and I are rewatching it. I've already seen it once this season, and we're watching it again. And it's just, yeah, absolutely adore it.
Nice.
The other one is Rocky Horror Picture Show. Which again has been it's one of those that's just been a staple kind of in my family's household for a very long time. The first time I saw it, my parents cut it off about half an hour into the film. When it starts getting really dark, and it does, Rocky Horror I always describe Rocky Horror as being like a party where, it starts out, it's like, oh, isn't this fun? It's exciting and everything. And then it starts getting weird. And then it gets weirder, and then by the end of it, everyone is drunk and in the swimming pool. Like it's that kind of film, and I think it definitely kind of turns down a little bit in the second act and begins a descent somewhat. But it's such an iconic film. It is again still so much fun. The songs are still so great. Tim Curry, I firmly believe that everyone, regardless of gender or sexual identity, is attracted to Tim Curry in that movie. Like it just doesn't matter. Any sort of emotions that you have around sexuality is just directed at Tim Curry. And possibly Meatloaf. Meatloaf is pretty hot as well. So those are the two major films for me that I just absolutely 100% have to rewatch them. Some of the others are like Hocus Pocus, which I love. Now Hocus Pocus 2, which is great. And I liked the retconning. Thank you very much. And there are a few others, but those two are like the major ones for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have some others. Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein have kind of become a necessary part of my Halloween season too. I'm trying to think.
I love rewatching the Universal horror films. I think that they're the kind of thing, because I've seen them enough, they're the kind of thing that I can put on in the background and just enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I've seen Bride of Frankenstein more in the past 2 years than I probably ever had before.
Yeah, they're so great. And it was so fun to get to see Frankenstein and Dracula last year on the big screen. I'm kind of sad that they didn't do that again this year. I don't know what happened, but I wish they had. I guess last year was partly because of the anniversary and stuff, but yeah, but so those are, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. Wow. So those are a couple that I watch all the time. And then for me, it's I have my staples, and then I try to find some new ones to watch every year that I haven't necessarily seen before. So this year I finally watched The Howling. I had never seen that.
Oh, I love The Howling.
It was so much fun.
I love The Howling with my man Patrick McNee. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I just watched that this week, and I was just like, how have I never watched this before?
That's a great one. That's my favorite werewolf movie of the 80s. And I've gotten into trouble saying that, by the way. I had numerous people block me on Twitter for saying that it was better than American Werewolf in London.
Oh my gosh, people need to chill. I mean, nothing beats Teen Wolf, but
which I still haven't seen. That's on my list for
You've
this year.
never seen Teen Wolf?
I've
Wow.
never, it just was never, it wasn't a staple of my childhood. And
Yeah.
like, I just never saw it. I've never seen it, but it's on my list for this year. I did just watch Saw for the first time. As I related a little bit on Twitter, which I actually quite liked. Like I had been led to believe that Saw was a lot nastier than this is the first film, and I understand that the sequels get worse and are meaner and are just more focused on the torture and the torture porn aspect of it, which is why I hadn't watched the original film for quite a while, because that was my impression of it. But I actually quite liked it, and I thought it was very effective, and without being too horribly gruesome or too indulgent in the torture aspect.
Yeah, I don't love the first movie. I think it's fine, but yeah, it definitely doesn't really start to get gruesome until the second one. And then like I've only seen the first two, but my understanding is that they just get progressively worse from there. So
yeah, that was my understanding as well. Numerous people were like, "Oh, you'll be fine with Saw, but don't watch any of the sequels." So
yeah,
like, okay, I'm okay with that. I don't need to do more than that. I like James Wan anyways. One other film that has become more of a staple for me is Suspiria, the original Suspiria by Dario Argento, which I first saw when I was in college, and then has kind of I keep on going back to it, and every time I go back to it, particularly during October, I'm like, oh, I really like this. I don't know why I really like this. I probably shouldn't, but I really like this. So yeah, and any final thoughts for that, Karen?
Another one that I just always have to watch around this time of year is Psycho. I love Psycho so much.
It's funny because I don't consider Psycho a horror film, though I wouldn't necessarily say like that there's any reason behind that. But my attitude is always like Hitchcock made one horror movie, and that is The Birds. He did not make all of his other films or thrillers, but yeah, Psycho would probably fit into that category. So would Frenzy. Both of them are, Psycho is so influential on slasher films, but
yeah,
I'm always like, no, Psycho's not a horror film. Why not? It just isn't.
And I don't necessarily have an opinion on whether it's a horror movie or not, but it's just one that this just always feels like the right time of year to watch it.
It definitely is, and it's such a unique film in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it
Peacock actually has all four of the Psychos with Anthony Perkins. So I think this weekend I might just watch them all again. I've seen them all. I might just do it again this weekend.
I've never seen any of the sequels. I've actually
heard
really things about Psycho 2.
Psycho 2 is pretty good.
Decent film, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
3
hard.
and 4 are not good, but they're still just fun to watch.
Maybe I'll watch Psycho 2 just to have experienced that. See what happens to Norman after everything. It's just so weird to me to be like, oh, it's a sequel to a Hitchcock film that wasn't directed by Hitchcock. It's like,
yeah,
no.
I will say it's not as bad as the remake of Psycho,
which is just Psycho.
Right, it's just Psycho, but somehow worse. When you do a shot-for-shot remake, but somehow make it seem terrible. I don't know what happened there.
A good one of my very good friends from grad school actually, I'm not certain whether he wrote the essay, but he had a theory that was this entire theory about Gus Van Sant's remake of Psycho as being a mirror image of the original. And he it was a very complicated theory, but every single shot is not actually a repeated shot, but a mirror image shot of the original film. And again, it was one of those just that's really interesting, but why? What when it comes down to it, why are we
yeah.
And the thing was, it was an interesting theory, but at the same time, I don't think, Trey, I'm sorry if you're listening, please explain it to me again. I don't think he ever actually came to a conclusion as to why. But
yeah, that's funny.
So anything else before we close things out?
Not really. Just watch more movies.
Watch more movies. Most of the movies that we are talking about as our favorites are actually available on various streaming services. I know Rocky Horror is on Hulu. Young Frankenstein is on HBO Max. Halloween is on Shudder.
It's on Shudder / AMC Plus. It's also on TV a lot. Scream, I'm not sure where that's at right now. It was on HBO Max.
Scream and the Scream movies have been moving around. I know that
they were on Paramount at one point.
They might still be on Paramount. I know that, and I know that a few of them are also on Tubi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, always check out Tubi. Tubi has the weirdest collection of horror movies.
It does. It really does. But it's fascinating to see what they have, and and just scrolling through Tubi, you can find some gems too. I also want to put in just a quick plug for Kino Cult. I haven't watched anything on there recently, but they have some they have just quite an interesting collection of hard to find movies, and that's a free app, like a free service, so you can just watch stuff on there. That's all I wanted to say.
Sorry. All right. Well, I think that is going to close us out for this week. And as always, thank you all so much for listening to us. We are going to be back next week, and we will be talking about Guillermo del Toro because, and in order to prep for that, his Cabinet of Curiosities series is coming out. October 25th, I believe, is when it starts.
It's a 4-night event, yes, and it starts October 25th.
And so we're really excited to talk about that. I'm really excited to talk about it. There's all kinds of exciting shit that's going to be on there, not just by Del Toro himself, but also by a whole bunch of really great directors and writers. So I am looking forward to that a great deal. But we're also going to talk about some of his other horror films, because I don't think that there's a contemporary director, like a more contemporary director, who's done more for kind of horror than Del Toro right now. Like he really has been kind of building that up. So we're going to talk about that next week.
And Cabinet of Curiosities is basically, it's 8 1-hour episodes, sort of. So it's like 8 short movies, 2 per night over the course of 4 nights. So yeah,
all by different directors. There's some like
all by different directors.
There's some Lovecraft adaptations, which I'm really looking forward to. It's going to be good. So thank you so much for listening, and we will be having a bonus episode coming out before long. We're going to be doing Addams Family Values, I believe.
Yay!
And I'm looking forward to that too. So the full episode will be available to our patrons, who include Ali, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Mason, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Pau, and Will. Again, thank you so much for continuing to support us. We will try to have more fun stuff coming up really soon. And if you want to join our Patreon, that's patreon.com/citizendame, and you will get all of our bonus episodes and other fun things. If you do that, you also get episodes early and get to listen to us and consider all of the many brilliances that we talk about. We also have a Ko-Fi, that's ko-fi.com/citizendame. And of course, we have our website, citizendamepod.com, where Karen's various reviews are going to be going up. And I've got a few more reviews coming up. So definitely check that out. We try to keep that updated and have some really interesting stuff to talk about there. You can also email us if you want to get in touch with us, citizendamepod@gmail.com. And we are on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. We are on Twitter and Instagram @citizendamepod, and our Letterboxd is @citizendame, where we have various lists, including less scary movies, if you're not into gore and like really bad shit happening, but that are still spooky for the spooky season. You can, of course, get in touch with us individually. I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd @LHBusiness. Karen, where are you?
I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd @Karen M. Peterson.
And that will close us out for this week. We'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Would the doctor care for a brandy before retiring?
No. Thank you.
Some warm milk? Perhaps?
No, thank you very much. No thanks.
Ovaltine.
Nothing. Thank you. I'm a little tired.